Nickal, Cody Brundage. Okay, UFC 300. Big announcement, right? I want to say we've only been told of 3 UFC 300 fights. And that's one of them. Aljamain Sterling going to take on Kattar. I'm trying to think of who the third one was. Maybe that's what the one I told you that they're working on, which is Max versus Justin Gaethje, which by the way isn't done, but I can confirm it for you. They're trying to get it done. You would think that's a big fight. That's my only point. If UFC 300 is coming up, everybody's talking about it. You would think this must be a very big fight. Brundage versus Nickal. So, guys, all I'm attempting to do here is to figure this out. I must tell you, if I got pulled into the UFC, you could point to any office, I could sit down and I could play. Anything. You could bring me into sponsorships, I could help you with it. You could bring me into production, you could bring me into PR, you could bring me into marketing. You're best to not bring me into matchmaking. You're best to not bring me. There is an art to matchmaking. There is a true art. And I think that you guys would know that even within yourselves. Because if I asked you to go out and make me a big fight, you're going to tell me Conor McGregor versus so-and-so. And you're going, didn't I do a great job, Chael? Well, you took the biggest star in the sport and you matched him up with somebody. No, you really didn't do that great of a job. Anybody could sell the Ferrari. Can you get the Volvo off the lot today? So, I want to just try to understand what's going on here. Okay, in Bo's last contest, he was a 24-1 favorite. 24-1 favorite represented the biggest disparity, the biggest line in the history of the UFC. Now, let's look at numbers. Bo Nickal is 27 years old. He's had 5 fights. His longest fight went 2 minutes and 40 some seconds. So, we've now got him in another fight on a feature card known as 300. He's a 14-1 favorite. Now, 14-1 favorite is about half as big of a favorite as he was in his last fight, but I can assure you, without even seeing the rest of the card, he will be the biggest favorite on the card. Not only will there be nobody that's a 14-1 favorite on the card, there aren't 2 people that you could match up together and get a 14-1 spread. You could take a brand new 155-pounder, whoever that is, as long as he's fought, but he could be 0-1, and you could put him against King Khabib, and Khabib on his return fight will not be a 14-1 favorite, just to put in perspective for you. So Bo is a 14-1 favorite. 14-1 favorite is the odds maker saying, why are we doing this? There is no reason to do this fight. And I'm just looking at trying to understand, is this a number situation? Do we need to get Bo X amount of fights before he goes in for a title? Do we need to get Bo X amount of fights before he goes into a top 5? Do we need to get him X amount of fights before he goes into a rankings match? Is that all that this is? Because I can remember when Khamzat Chimaev was 4-0 in the UFC and all of the pundits wanted him into a title fight with Kamaru Usman. And we were told no. We were told he needed 4, or I think maybe it was even 5 more fights before we get there. Well, he had 2 fights, and then he did fight Kamaru. Kamaru was no longer the champion, and he beat Kamaru Usman. So it was very meaningful. I mean, it was extremely meaningful. We said this guy needs 5 fights before he can have an opportunity. We gave him that same opportunity, but the belt just wasn't up. Oh, and by the way, he succeeded. That is a damning statement that I just made. That is a math and a rhyme that you really need to understand. He couldn't get the match because Kamaru had the belt. Kamaru's no longer got the belt. Oh, great, give him the match. Well, it's the same guy doing the same things. Can he beat him or not? Turned out the answer was yes. So, okay, now we've got this Bo situation. How many squash matches can we do? Oh, and by the way, if you don't agree with me and you don't think it's a squash match, we're going to find out real fast. We're going to find out, is this a squash match that is done to promote Bo Nickal, which has never been done in the UFC? Conor McGregor did not have those types of favors done for him. Brock Lesnar on day 1 had to go against a 2-time world champion named Frank Mir, who happened to be on a downward skid. He wrecked a motorcycle. I remember the whole thing. Still a 2-time world champion. So this has never been done, but we're going to find out if this is what's being done. Real simple. Is it put on the main card? If we put a squash match on the main card of 300, then yes, we're playing a game. Bo's got an uncle or a grandparent, somebody that works within the office that hasn't been identified yet. Like that, we're going to know. I mean, the mask will be removed, and we will have a full understanding of what's happening here if he's put on a main card. If he's not put on a main card, then we're going to have to just look around and go, well, what are we doing it for? Why would we do a squash match, according to the odds makers, with an undefeated star who's 27 years young against Cody Brundage on an under? Why are we even doing it in the first place, right? I mean, you're in a massive juxtaposition, and you're going to be massively forced to answer the question one way or the other. Why is this guy getting carried? Or this guy is not getting carried as an undercard. Why are we even doing the match? And it is a peculiar situation. And you're either able to follow the logic that I laid out for you about Chimaev does not get to fight Usman until he gets 5 more fights, and then 2 fights later being in there with Usman. You're either going to get that logic or you aren't. Oh, and by the way, he wins the match, Chimaev. I will never forget the night, but a friend of mine, training partner of mine, Pat Cummings, had never fought in the UFC. He debuted in the UFC because he was willing to do something that nobody else in the UFC was willing to do, which is to fight the bear himself, Daniel Cormier, on 2 weeks' notice. So it ends up being a co-main event spot, which, by the way, Daniel wins. Daniel then goes into a world title fight, his first ever world title fight. It's very important that you know that, because I will see so many fighters go, well, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't move me up the rankings. It doesn't do anything for me. Daniel Cormier fought a guy who'd never even been signed to the company, and that was his fight into a title shot. So don't you tell me what makes sense, because you don't know. Now, what would have happened if Pat Cummings won that fight? Would Pat Cummings have been shown the same respect? Would have he gone right into a title fight in his second contest? Why shouldn't he? He just beat the guy none of you could beat, and he took an opportunity that none of you were willing to take. Why shouldn't he be rewarded for that? And when you start to understand these types of things, you do start to ask yourself, what is the plan with Bo? And it's not a matchmaker's fault, by the way. Like, the matchmaker did nothing wrong. When you make a match, and then the odds makers look at it and go, well, I know more than you do, and I'm willing to put my money on it. And you get a major house like DraftKings that's willing to pay that guy to set the line, who looked at it and said, hey, matchmakers, you screwed this one up. Like, nobody here did something that they weren't supposed to do. But it's still a very meaningful question. Does Bo have an uncle or a grandparent over at the UFC? No, that's pretty darn unlikely. Pretty unlikely. If he did, he wouldn't have had to wait till he's 26 years old to get signed in the first place. He wouldn't have had to come to the Contenders Series twice instead of once in the first place. No, he's not getting any favors. Well, what could the other option possibly be? The other option, he's a hell of a lot better than you guys are aware. Now you got an odds maker that's willing to part with his money over your mouth of your rankings room. Your rankings room, which is yet to be identified, if that's one person, if that's 12 people, or if that's a computer program that just spits out these names with numbers next to them every Tuesday by 9 a.m. They apparently don't have the courage and or the balls. They're not putting their money with it. DraftKings is putting their money with it. They're telling you Bo Nickal's a lot better than you think he is. Why would an outside firm have more courage and more wisdom than your own rankings room? That's the question that's being asked here. Don't shoot the messenger. It's plain as day. This isn't Chael versus you. This is your partner, your sports betting franchise partner, who says you, rankings room, don't know what you're doing.